Good morning, LinkedIn. Happy Monday. Welcome to another edition of Let's Build Your
What's up,
HubSpot
everyone?
map with Bryan Ossa. How you doing, man?
What's up, everyone? Doing fantastic and super stoked to kind of continue the super taboo conversation of pricing. And so, yeah, it's a good week. It's a good morning, and yeah, all good things right now, buddy.
Yeah. Why are we so excited to have pricing conversations, do you think?
Honestly, because we don't generally. There's so much discomfort about talking anything that's tied to money. And I know we hit upon this during our call last week too, where it was just you're in a sales process, you have the conversation with the client, you start talking about money, and everyone's just like, "How much is it going to cost me?" And then you just kind of like, I I want to. You start hesitating on what you want that answer to be, and then you may overstep, shoot yourself in the foot by offering too low, or just kind of like talk around the point, and then it just gets uncomfortable, and understandably so. But it just gets uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I think it's almost guaranteed, like without a pricing strategy,
Mm-hmm.
then you put sales in a position to just race to the bottom and try to offer the lowest price. It's literally the only thing that they're really in control of to try and like it's the only lever, if you
Mm-hmm.
will, that they have to close a sale. And as soon as it just creates the most transactional experiences, which kind of force it's like a forcing factor to make sure it's always about pricing, which
Mm-hmm.
ensures the race to the bottom. And you can't even think about ways to, get out of that. So I look forward to, you found a pretty good, um, guide from
Mm-hmm.
HubSpot. There's so much stuff out there. I haven't seen this in a long time, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, simply following a tool like this and applying it to your organization is something that we love helping people do, but there's a little bit of work,
Oh
to be
yeah.
done up front, and that's the whole reason pricing strategy, right? And there's lots of different ways you can look at it, and this pricing strategy calculator, kind of helps you flesh that out.
Oh yeah. And you're entirely right about that. And the first thing I'm going to kind of share is that everything we're going to be talking about today, you can really get started with this completely free on HubSpot's website. And if you just go looking literally for the sales pricing calculator, you're going to get access to this sheet, and you can use this for your own business and create everything you need based off of your own specific parameters. But the reason why I like this, and Chris mentioned this a moment ago, is like it's been around for several years at this point. But honestly, it's still a really good foundational point to get yourself set up on your pricing. And I know it talks about a variety of different kinds of components over here, but again, our focus is really on the five I have highlighted over in the tabs below. And just as a quick recap, if you weren't with us here last week, cost plus pricing in a nutshell is taking the cost of a good, adding your markup charge, and that equals your final price. Competition based pricing is essentially you marketing your price roughly around what your competitors are also charging. Hourly pricing, straightforward. You have a rate that you go forward with, and you charge that by the hour, and you just have hours times that equals final cost. And then project-based pricing, you charge by the project, and it's usually a flat fee, and you might have some hourly fees built into it if things go long. And then value-based pricing is where we love it, and that's pretty much translating the work that you provide into something that actually provides a lot of value to the user. And by extension, you can adjust your pricing based off of the perceived value there. And so, just that in a quick nutshell, a lot of what we're going to be focusing on over this week and the next few weeks is really diving into the meat and grits of each one of these different pricing models. We're going to be going over what they are, when they could be used, and just kind of very bluntly explaining why value-based pricing is this version plus a little bit better, assuming that you're in the position to work for it.
Yeah. And I'm sure for some, I know for some out there, they're going to like, we have options on how we can price our
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Like, yeah. And this is why it's a problem when, it's so interesting when people say they know what marketing is or they know what its role is in the organization. And then marketing gets brought in
Mm-hmm.
at the tail end, maybe. Oftentimes it's sales, but like the product is developed, engineers have finished prototyping, and then it's like, okay, how are we going to price this thing?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, uh, you know, one of the places marketing can help is pricing, one of the original 4 Ps, right? And but if you put yourself in a situation where it's all you can do is either cost plus or competition based,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because everything's already been, figured out. And all the places you could have added value in the process, uh, it's so much harder kind of to develop that back
Mm-hmm.
in, right? And focus on, outcomes instead of the output, right? All that gets way harder when you bring that in at the end of the process, right?
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And that's where it's important to incorporate the marketing team. To your point, is that oftentimes when you're trying to understand your potential customer and those you're going to be selling to, you're leaning on marketing's analysis and their research. They're doing all of that work in order to understand the demographics behind who these people are and why they want to be buying from you so that they can serve them with the right messaging at the right time to get them into the conversation for sales. And that information is just really valuable to bring into the conversation so that you can build out these strategies before you start building out uh, to depth of the product. I'm not saying from the get-go, don't start your pricing and then build your product. Don't do that. But at least having a strong idea of the product, then defining your pricing, and then you can use that pricing model to define how in depth or not you actually build out the actual scope, because it becomes very, very easy to get completely wrapped up in creating this line item that is your total baby. You spend so much time building it, and for example, HubSpot onboarding, you spend so much time defining what that process looks like, and then you're like, okay, this was a lot of work for me, and so I'm actually going to mark it up at I'll do a HubSpot onboarding for $3,000, and then you start looking at other pricing models like competition, you realize, the average HubSpot agency is actually only charging 1,800 and I'm charging 3,000. There's going to be a disconnect there. And so that's where it's important to have this idea and incorporate these different pricing strategies into the conversation on the earlier side of the equation. So as we start looking into this and diving into cost plus pricing, so as we were talking about a moment ago, it's really focused on like the cost of your goods, the cost of your product, the cost of whatever the thing is that you're selling, and then adding a markup value to it. Oftentimes that markup value is a percentage, but sometimes you can have that be a flat cost. This is very, very common for e-commerce places who aren't using the competition-based pricing, and it's very common in the retail setting. Where it's common in agency space as well is things that are very, very scalable and repeatable. And I use that, for example, just like social media marketing, and using that for like building out a social calendar, social graphics, and just kind of creating copy with the ability to understand what your client is looking for and then building all of that out in a very quick repeat. I say quick, but make sure you're doing your due diligence, of course, a quick and repeatable way. That's something you can very easily productize. And anything that you're able to productize and say, I am doing this and it's going to take me this long and this is my turnaround time. And you know those three things pretty much down pat every single time, no matter what the client is. Chances are cost plus pricing makes the most sense for it, because you know exactly what that's going to cost you, and you can incorporate things like your hourly rate plus a mix of your value, and then have that become your markup in order to define what your cost plus pricing is.
Yeah,
So
and it's
go for it,
easy to end up here. Um, I'll just kind of talk through it as if you
please.
want to fill this out. Uh, it's very straightforward, right? So you end up in a place where the sales team or whoever needs to get it can get it very quickly. Not a lot of calculation here.
Mm-hmm.
Also, like if you're being more transparent with the customer, like it's a lot easier for them to understand. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, 10 posts cost this much money because each post costs this much,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that's another reason we usually end up here. It's very easy to get going and get started. There's not a lot of, as we move towards the spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
of value over to value based pricing, you have to learn what people value
Mm-hmm.
in order to get there. And there's only
Right.
one way to do that, and that's by talking to them, having conversations, iterating product design,
Experimenting
product
with pricing.
roadmaps, right?
Yeah.
So it's will take a minute to get there usually. Um, but that's kind of how I think about this spectrum. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and if you say you're customer centric, but you haven't done that work, of course everything is going to be like towards this cost plus pricing or even hourly
Mm-hmm.
pricing.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. And so just using that mentality to kind of define out what this pricing model looks like. Use it again. We're using this template that you can get over on the HubSpot calculator site, and within each one of these pricing models, it has the keys. So we're just going to be following that along. So in this case, we're going to use the example of social media marketing package. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking maybe you're doing 1 month of social posts for a client, and maybe that is a dozen posts plus a dozen graphics to go along with those posts. I'm not going to include anything else as part of this. So exclude everything that would be like, oh, well, we're creating a blog or a white paper or just insert piece of content here. That is completely independent of what we're talking about here. This is only for the posts themselves. And so if you know that social calendar is typically takes you, maybe 3 hours to build, and in that 3 hours you value your time at 100 an hour just to make life easy. The cost of it is going to be essentially $300, and that's what we're have as our delta. And so that $300 is our initial unit selling price. That's what it's going to cost us in terms of time, energy, and effort in order to build it. And then if you want to get a little bit deeper into the nuances for doing your forecasting, your projections, which I do recommend that you do, that's where you kind of move into the next part of this. So if you have, let's assume you're working with 5 clients, 3 of them want a social calendar. You'll type in the 3 because you're doing that 3 per month, because I'm assuming that you're building this on a monthly cadence. This is where you start looking into how you want to be doing your markups. And like we were mentioning before, you can have a fixed markup or percentage based markup. And that's kind of up to your interpretation in order to understand. And in this case, I typically like working with percentage based markups a lot of the time once you have a foundational understanding of what all this looks like. And what I mean by that is once you start figuring out, I'm doing social media calendars, I'm producing short form and long form content in the forms of like maybe different kinds of blogs, you're building web pages and all of these things that are they take time, but that time tends to be fairly consistent and it is all repeatable, you can usually define what that markup percentage looks like. Versus if you're doing something that is a little bit more one off, that's where you might be considering a fixed dollar increase amount. So in the percentage based aspect, let's just say you want to throw in let's call it a 7% markup, because in all honesty, like 7% is kind of generous, to be entirely honest. And if you're looking at double digit markups for things like this, chances are you're not in the right pricing model for this. And that's where value based pricing comes into play, or some of these other things that we're talking about. But for argument's sake, let's just assume that you're doing 7% markup. You now then have your entire calculation for what this cost plus model is going to look like for you for that social calendar. And so when you're going to your client and they're asking, okay, well, how much is this going to cost me? You're not telling them, oh, well, it's 300 to build it. You're going to say it's 321, or maybe you want to make it easier on yourself and just say, you know what, it's 320 or 325, whatever it is, just to make a nice round number. And then that gap that you have there is what you can call your profit. And very simply, that's all cost plus pricing is. It's just taking that flat value and providing your markup to it.
Yeah. And I think it's, all this stuff we're talking about is highly variable depending on the situation. When it comes to physical goods, usually there's markups of like 40% or somewhere between 20 or 40%,
Yep.
whether or not we're making it ourselves or we're buying it from someplace else. And so you take into account things like volume and basically using those margin numbers to say, okay, can we sell 1,000 of these? If we can, then this markup might make sense. If we can't do that many, then we can only sell like 500 and we might need some more markup just to be able to survive. But then are people willing to pay, that markup? That's where you start to look at these other, you look at what the competition is doing and your positioning in the market. And that's where, again, like we reduce with cost plus and hourly, we have the least amount of kind of levers that we can move to make it, one, palatable to the market so that they will buy based on the price, but also what the margin can be, because you're not adding in any value other than the transaction of I give you money and you give me, the output or the thing that I need to solve this job right now. Right.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. And that's where, again, we were using social media calendars as an example in cost plus pricing. But in all honesty, if you look at this from a truly business perspective, cost plus pricing is not the best way to use social media. Like to use social calendar, for example. It was just an example in this scenario. Like, to Chris's point, a lot of what the focus is on is something that is a product or a service that is very much you have insert quantity of, and you're charging based off of the quantity of that. So using that in a more practical example here, it would be like you creating a social media graphic template, and you've designed this maybe on Canva, and you want to share that with other people, and then they pay you for a Halloween graphic that they can use on their platform, and you mark that as, took you 10 minutes to build it, and so you're going to charge, I don't know, $20 or so for a series of Halloween social graphics. That is a perfect example of a good time to use a cost plus pricing model, because it doesn't matter how many or how few of these that you're going to be selling. It requires little to no effort on your end in order to deliver. They're running that transaction, because it's a product in the same way you would enter a retail establishment and buy a Halloween card or a Halloween costume or something along those lines. You have that finished product that requires no more effort on your end in order to deliver. And that is the key component for a cost plus pricing. You don't want to put yourself in a position where you need to be having added work for anything that is within cost plus. You want it to be the final good as it is, no other extra steps, effort, etc. required, except of course maybe shipping, but that's a different component. Because as soon as you start doing that, you start defeating your own purpose, because it's really hard to measure the expected cost and the expected markup, and by extension the output cost of what this thing is going to be offered to your individual customers on, when you have this dynamic amount of time or effort being presented. You want it to be one and done. And again, another example, Gunner glasses. It's a single product. I can order one, I can order 50. It's all the same. It's all the same to the brand. They have what it costs them to make it and what they're selling it for.
So you didn't need any training to go with those sunglasses?
I mean, maybe a little bit for my eyes, but that's a different story.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's why like the other levers, um, or maybe one other lever is like if you know that 321 $321 is the most people are going to pay, um, then you've got to find lower cost ways,
Mm-hmm.
right? To That's the only way you can make your profit better.
Mm-hmm.
That's where like AI and repeatability are coming into play big time in digital services.
Mm-hmm.
But also, right, we know that lower, like if it's 321 here and it's $100 over here, then what is the quality of that calendar going to be? And that's where you really have there's nothing to say, oh, I'm going to pay for your 321,
Mm-hmm.
because there's nothing about the value or quality about that. You haven't made that clear. And to your last point about delivering a final product, this is why I don't like you know the traditional definitions of products. Like if we're
Mm-hmm.
making products and services, but then we know customer experience is where we win, on the competitive battlefield, if you will, then just because we've given them the posts, right? If they're not there to engage with what happens after the posts, then they're not going to get the value. They're not going to be successful with the product that you're giving them. So you start to understand that, okay, and this happens with physical goods all the time. Like, okay, you received it, now you don't know how to use it. So there's no
Mm-hmm.
way you're going to be successful. You're sending it back. Or we just haven't planned that into the pricing. We do it, we do the training, we do onboarding, we do support, but we haven't factored any of that in. So all the
Mm-hmm.
margin disappears, right? And we're not tracking any of that. So when we talk about, like, why are we talking about this in a mapping session? It's because it all needs to map together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if the process isn't clean, right? E-com and stuff, that works because it's buy from here, sell it on the site, and ship it, right? That's all that's involved. Um, and but when we're doing especially services or SaaS products and onboardings, and we're experiencing that right now in this ecosystem, the price you pay does not determine, the quality of the service that you get on both sides of the spectrum, free versus, $20,000-$30,000 a month
Mm-hmm.
from some agencies. So hopefully, you know, if you're thinking about your pricing strategies, this can help you there, but also this should help some people understand like how to evaluate pricing of the people that they're looking, to do business with.
Exactly. And that's why again we advocate for value-based pricing if you're able to understand what this looks like, because that 321, that's based off of that raw number. And if you're finding that your ultimate value and what your customers are willing to pay is well below that, or even well above that, you're able to adjust that accordingly, not based off this particular markup flat cost or percentage base. Because when you start doing that, you're going to have a variety of products that are probably going to have different markups, and that's going to be that much harder to maintain than if you just set yourself at a, okay, you know what, it costs me $100 to do it, but everyone who wants this is willing to pay me $500 for it. And that's largely a combination due to the quality of the product that you're delivering, the time you're delivering it in, and also just the competition you have in the space. Because if you're the only one doing this and you're extremely valuable, and look, for example, ChatGPT, when it first came out almost a couple of years ago, it was the only real LLM tool that a lot of people were able to use without having PhD tier or above education. And they were able to charge whatever they're looking for there. And another good example of that is way back in the day when the Tesla Model S came out, able to charge whatever they wanted for it because it was the first vehicle in that space. And those are both good examples of value-based pricing, versus now you can kind of see how that value-based, using the ChatGPT example, has shifted a lot more to that competition-based pricing with the evolution of Llama and Cloud and Gemini and Perplexity and a number of these other subcategories, well, not subcategories, but different brands that you can choose from. And all of their pricing models aren't one checkbox. It's a combination of all of these. And that's ultimately all value-based pricing boils down to. There's no fill in the formula, as much as the spreadsheet's going to tell us otherwise in probably a few weeks, but there is no fill in the formula and you get your pricing model. It's a combination of several of these simultaneously. You just need to understand to what percentage the individual pricing model, so cost-based versus competition-based, et cetera, fits into that equation for you and for your business.
Yeah. Yeah. And I look forward to digging into more of these
Oh, yeah.
as we move forward. So I think we'll hit, one a week,
Mm-hmm.
and, really just take a minute to help people understand kind of what's behind the price tag here. And, it's going to be different for every business, but, it's usually not hard to find with most businesses where there could be some value,
Mm-hmm.
provided, especially when you know that, like, the only way to sell experienced based things is through value based pricing, right?
Exactly.
And we don't do it because we don't do the work of understanding how much value people put on the experience that you're providing. But when you start to get like Prime, like Amazon Prime,
Mm-hmm.
right? That subscription, like, maybe there was a cost to like the data infrastructure required
Mm-hmm.
to support that. But now, I mean, that price is not, it's like 100% value is the only reason that you subscribe to that. It's that
Mm-hmm.
knowing that you can go there and check out, and you don't have to worry about whether you're getting the best price or not, whether it's going to ship to you the fastest, what options you're going to have,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's been built up over time. And now it's the holy grail of recurring revenue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when they raise the price, I don't remember when it was in the last few years, but
Mm-hmm.
I doubt anybody like blinked an eye,
Mm-hmm.
right, to pay that price. So it's gonna be fun to go through
Yep.
these with you. I
Exactly.
love this plan, and so if you're out there like thinking about new service offerings or new products, or looking at old products and figuring out, okay, what can we do differently?
Yep.
We're gonna keep going through these different pricing strategies. we'll help you find some opportunities, and let's grow.
Yep.
Have a great week, everybody.